Welcome to Leaders Path, leadership journeys of people within the IT and business change professions. Brought to you by Middleton's Assured Talent, IT leadership and business change recruitment specialists.
Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Leaders Path, where we look to dissect the career journeys of leaders in the IT and business change realm. Really pleased to have today someone called Richard Copley, head of business change at the legal firm DWF. We've got someone with a massive amount of experience to dissect today and to gain some shared learnings from. So Richard was just saying 37 years as a project manager and well over 20 years of that doing major transformation change. So welcome today, Richard. Thanks for taking part.
Thank you.
So Richard, our first question that we always like to ask, in a business networking sense or even in a social sense, when someone asks you, what is it you do? What's the title that you give them and how do you describe it?
I think that the title I most often give is program manager, because most of the work I do seems to be program management. If people ask me what I actually do, I think what I most often say these days is that I'm the person that takes a firm's strategy, a business's strategy, and turns it into action.
Right.
So I spend a lot more time now at the front end of programs than I perhaps do at the back end of programs.
Yeah.
So a lot of my work is in shaping large change programs, making certain that we understand the strategy, understand what it is that business wants to do, and then trying to put together a piece of work, a program of work that will deliver that. Recognizing that, of course, the strategy changes, the circumstances, the context changes, that you have to adapt as you go in a program. That's the nature of a program compared to a project. But you have to start in a good enough place to give you a good chance of success.
Yeah.
So, program manager, but that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, no, thank you. And can you give us a brief overview of, I suppose, your career to that point, highlighted terms? How did you get to where you are now?
A slightly circuitous route. I started off many years ago in market research, so I've always had a fascination with numbers. So I worked at the data end of market research, initially in financial services. And I found my way into computing because the system that I was using at a building society to do all our market research was managed by an internal team from our IT department, and they one by one disappeared.
Right.
They left to do other things, and eventually I was asked if I would like to change sides and go and actually run the system, learn how to run the system, learn how to be the programmer, the analyst on the system, because I was the only person left in the organisation that knew what it did and why it did it. So I started all over again in IT in my mid-20s, and through a variety of positions, I found myself in I guess my early 30s working for a consulting firm that was just starting out on the whole topic of what was then called information resource planning, but what we would now recognise as essentially strategic planning for IT.
Right.
So when that first wave of IT expired, in that first wave of IT, everything we did was magic. We could automate anything and everybody thought it was absolutely fantastic. And then after a few years, people could see the gaps between all the islands of automation that we'd created, and it then became that what was that forerunner of architecture, of enterprise architecture, but a whole school called information resource planning, largely based on the work of James Martin,
right,
the late IT guru, and the firm that I was working for decided that was something that they could package and sell to a large number of large companies. So we created a practice in that and essentially taught ourselves how to do it through a variety of assignments and studies. And that got me into architecture. And then in the early 1990s, and I know I probably sound older than anybody else in your audience, I was given the assignment to do all the architectures for a new life and pensions company. So your older listeners will remember that in the 1990s, a lot of people in financial services started looking for convergence between banking and insurance. So a lot of banks set up insurance companies, and I was working, our consultancy was recruited by what was then the Leeds Permanent Building Society to help them set up a life and pensions company. Mm-hmm. And my job on it was to be the enterprise architect. But when we got there, we discovered that, they didn't really have a plan for doing what was an incredibly large piece of work. So I sat down as a prelude to doing the architecture to crank out what you now recognise as a program plan. Mm. And eventually, as a result of that, after I'd done the architecture, I became the program manager. And in those days, program management was, a very, very new discipline. But that's how I got into program management, and I've done that off and on now for the last 20 or so years, occasionally punctuated with setting up change departments for organisations that don't have them. So I've done that 4 or 5 times, but I keep going back from that to large-scale program management.
Mm. Do you, if you look back, would you say you've enjoyed one over the other in the sense of building functions or being more at that delivery of programs end?
Strangely, I think if I look back on it all, I'd like to have stayed as a systems analyst. Right. So the whole architecture piece of it, the understanding how things work and how they fit together was always the bit that intrigued me the most. So The last 20 years has been a bit of in a sense, a digression from that. But the setting up of change departments usually involves the setting up of a business analysis team as well as a project management team. So, I've occasionally found my way back to process and data analysis, which is probably my first love, in setting up the change functions. To be honest with you, setting up the change functions can become slightly repetitive, whereas I find that programs never are, even though you use the same skills and the same techniques and the same competences on every program. Each one tends to be so different. Its problems are so unique, rooted in the context of that program, that programs are probably much less repetitively boring than potentially setting up a change function in an organisation, which tends to be the same project over and over again. Yeah.
And I suppose that role can almost become BAU quite quickly once the function's performing as it should.
Well, that's the key, because I've always done that, or nearly always done that, as a contractor or a consultant. My aim is to replace myself as quickly as possible, so that having got through the pain of the initial change, we're handing over something which is, as you say, becoming steady state quite quickly to somebody that can run with it on a permanent basis. Yeah.
And just so we understand, so how much of that career has been as a contractor then, in terms of, the last however many years?
So the last 15 years,
right?
I've been working for myself.
Yeah. So if you look back over your career, so obviously you were saying systems analysis has been the bit that's maybe engaged, or you pine for at times. But what would you say is the best career move you've made when you look back throughout, the full duration?
I think for me, the best career move I made was in the mid-1980s. I had worked for a building society in England. I had worked for a big government agency and one of its subsidiaries in Canada. So I'd worked in-house for the first probably 15 years of my career, something like that, or probably the first 12 years. And then I got the chance to go and work for a consultancy. And it was the best firm I've ever worked for, for a variety of reasons. But most importantly, it gave me a variety of things to do in a compressed period of time that really accelerated my learning and gave me variety, kept me interested, reawakened a thirst for learning that you can sometimes lose when you're doing the same thing over and over again. And although I have been back in house a couple of times since then, I found that variety was what grew my career very, very quickly at that point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Richard. So, looking at talent, you've talked about building functions. I presume along the way you've done a lot of recruitment yourself, whether that's been external recruitment, building teams, or bringing people into your function from other parts of the organisation. I know you and I have talked about this a few times in the past. So understanding what your view on talent is how would you say you recognise talent? And I'll add in another question. But do you believe that that people, some individuals are more talented than others, and therefore is talent to recognise, or is it more about alignment to a role from your point of view? So I know that's a couple of questions, but I think the second question maybe influences the answer to the first question.
So I've got a variety of answers as well.
Okay.
I think one of the things I learned at that consultancy in Canada was not to recruit to the role. One of the things that we experimented with and were very successful with was just finding and recruiting people we thought were talented and would be a good fit for the culture of our company. And then we trusted that having found them, we would always find work for them. And we always did. And I always remember watching one of my peers, a very, very senior project manager, very, very competent guy, had a gap on his project, and he was determined to fill this gap to get him through this 3-month period on his project, and went and recruited somebody to do it. And I remember saying to him, well, what are you going to do with this guy when this project's over? Because that he doesn't look like somebody that would necessarily, want to stay with us after that, and it isn't necessarily someone we could use after that. And my friend said, well, we'll deal with that at the end of the project. That's a long way away. And of course it wasn't. It was 3 months away. Yeah. And sure enough, in 3 months' time, the project finished, and this poor guy really didn't have a viable role inside our firm, and eventually we had to let him go. And I always felt that was a piece of irresponsible recruitment on our part. So it depends, I guess, whether you really do have roles. In the consultancy world, you often don't. You're recruiting skills and competencies, for what you see as the emerging requirement of a lot of clients in common. I think in-house it's a lot easier to recruit to the role, but even there you have to recognise that roles do change, that organisations change shape, and that if you don't spend some time paying attention to the person, their talent, their chemistry, their fit to your organisation and its prevailing culture, then you're going to be in trouble. And I guess, to go back to your first question, do I think some people are more talented than others? Yes, I do. But I think that talent is an overused concept in some respects. I think as a society we keep talking about, the the search for talent, the race for talent. And what we discover as a society is that some of the people we thought were talented turn out not to be quite as talented as we thought they were. And we also discover, if we're careful and pay attention to it, that some people we thought weren't talented actually would be if we spent time encouraging them and growing them. And so I think lots of people have more talent than perhaps either they or we think. And it's part of our responsibility and their responsibility to find out how to grow people, because all of us have typically much more potential achievement than we might be, experiencing currently.
It's difficult. There's no one framework you can say this is the universal measure of people, and let's then recruit based on that measure. Lots of occupational psychologists obviously try and present a range of tools that we can use. It's whether it's about emotional intelligence, which I think has a potential impact and capability in certain jobs, but not all. Whether it's aptitude for certain, reasoning, so whether that's numerical or verbal. There's these tools that we can use, but it's just so complex, isn't it? And I think for me, the environment that someone's in will often be as big an influence on their performance than perhaps just their own ability, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense to me, because I've always believed that, in a sense, the system in which we work is much more powerful than our own individual abilities. That doesn't mean our individual abilities are irrelevant. They're not. But most of us, in a sense, work inside a system, a context that sets some limits on what can be achieved and what is likely to be achieved. And I always go back to the work of Deeming, the American quality guru, and he always said it's the process, it's not the individual. It's how we've designed the whole thing that tells us how well we'll perform. And I've just been reading Matthew Syed's book on black box thinking, which I recommend to everybody, and he returned to that same point that we are all, to some extent, the product of the organisation in which we work. The context in which we perform is set by that organisation. So there are definite limits, and and we need to take account of that when we're doing performance management, to make certain that it's the system that's not at fault, because it often is, rather than the person,
the individual. Yeah. And I think it's true, again, I'm sure a conversation you and I have had in the past, the very typical approach of recruitment of, I want to recruit someone who's done the same job in a similar, what I think to be a similar type of organisation. And if they've succeeded there, they'll of course succeed here, which is such a common, they need to have worked in financial services, they need to, those sort of measures of people in the recruitment process are so common. But each organisation has its own nuances to both the system, as you say, in terms of supporting their performance, but actually the challenges in each organisation will vary, but it may be about meeting the same objective, deliver that type of project, but the challenges in each organisation are different. It's kind of like you said at the beginning, each day as a programme manager, each programme is different. It may look like the same, but in a different organisation with a different set of people, it's different. And I'm always, keen when working with clients to say, well, look, what are the forces working against this individual in achieving those objectives? Because that probably tells us more about the strengths and attributes that you need than well, I just need them to deliver a similar project, a regulatory project in another mortgage company or whatever, or another law firm. But it's hard to sometimes see what the true forces are working against someone in a role. And it's certainly not something that you see written on a job spec, is it?
I think that's right. And I think, it sounds extreme language, but, sometimes you find that it's companies that lie on their CV as much as it's individuals that lie on theirs. And often when you see companies do recruitment and they're pretending, or they have convinced themselves that they are something different to what they are, and they try and recruit people to fit a culture that they don't have. And of course, when you get inside that organisation, you discover that it isn't as it was told to you, and actually the things that you thought you'd be good at turn out to be less relevant. The things that you really need to be good at, you don't have enough of. And I think, one of the points you made was about the use of tools in recruitment. And I think, one of the things I do see, and I run the risk of sounding like a grumpy old person at this point, but I've done a lot of interviews with HR people sat beside me, helping me do the recruitment, and I know that I tend to make a recruitment decision very early on. I know after speaking to somebody for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, I think I've got the measure of that person. I know they can do the job in a sense because we've already gone through their CV before they even get to the interview. We've checked them out with respect to their technical competency. But, what you're assessing in an interview is often the personal characteristics of that person and their fit to your organisation. And HR have got a variety of tools that seem to string that out forever and a day, to analyse it from a number of perspectives, batteries of psychometric testing and, as you say, EQ testing, all of which have validity, but sometimes, the tool tends to outweigh or outmuscle the thing on which you're supposed to be working, which is, the question about will this person fit in and contribute to our organisation.
I see it from both sides, really. There is undoubtedly a skill that comes through experience of recruiting that gives you that inward voice that just or don't, they're right or not. But I also see the merit at times to have an objective structure that equally measures a group of individuals that can maybe tell you something different or provide a greater level of information or a different type of information. But I do understand your point that you can make the correct gut instinct decision very quickly, much quicker than 3 psychometric tests, an aptitude test, an assessment day, and you come out with the same result. But I see room for both.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think the one of the things you learn as you get older is that your first impressions are often as wrong as they are right, and therefore, even though I might make a judgment that somebody has the right fit, one of the things I always do is make certain that people go through multiple interviews so that somebody else is interviewing them separately, not at the same time as me, but that we have at least a 2-phase interview process so that we can then work out between the interviewees the interviewers what we thought of that person. So it doesn't just rest on my judgment to learn, because that is as likely to be wrong as it is to be right.
It's tough, and it's definitely never an easy process. But I was laughing that you mentioned the comment about companies lying as weekly as people lying on CVs. Funnily enough, a good friend who runs a recruitment business who publishes a very good blog. I'll share the details of the blog in the notes. He just wrote a blog yesterday about lying on CV, probably slightly tongue-in-cheek to a current political party leadership campaign and rumours about certain individual in that. But someone in response in the comments said, "Well, I'll stop lying on my CV when companies stop lying on job specs." And I thought, that is very true. But what amazes me though, with a couple of clients that I work with who undoubtedly go to the end, go to the absolute nth degree to really make someone understand, warts and all, what it's like to work with them, that it creates much more engagement from candidates than the opposite. You know, and it's a sales technique as well. You know, taking something away from someone or telling someone the negative points of someone quite often pushes them towards thinking positively of it. And I think companies miss that sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
They undoubtedly think that, but also sometimes they just don't know, they don't have the clarity of what the issues are, or what the challenges are, or they're maybe naive to what they are. Interested. I say I'll share that blog at the end of in the notes, because it's very good. But so next question. What technology resource, or it may even be, you know, a good old fashioned non-technology, you know, related resource, but what resource currently has the biggest impact in your working life, you know, in terms of productivity?
I mean, this is a very unspectacular answer. You know, to be honest with you, in terms of software, I think there are three things that I rely on. You know, one is Microsoft Office in all its glory.
Yeah.
And I supplement that with two other pieces of software. One of which is software for mind mapping.
Oh yeah.
I find a lot of the problems that I deal with, it helps to do a mind map.
Yeah.
And I have a piece of software that works in the opposite direction to a mind map.
Oh.
It's a piece of software that was developed by a firm with whom I did some work, or continue to do some work, who are focused on techniques for getting meaning out of large amounts of input.
Right.
And this is particularly in a facilitation environment where you're getting lots of ideas in, and you're trying to make sense of those ideas. And this firm developed, you know, and there was an academic underpinning to it, techniques for, in effect, acquiring that input from individuals or groups, and then grouping it through affinity analysis, and then refining it so, you know, 1,000 ideas become 100 grouped ideas, become 10 grouped ideas, become the three things that you're going to do.
Interesting.
You know, and I've seen it used on 24-hour workshops where, you know, you got teams who are trying to solve specific problems or deal with, you know, a specific crisis in their organization, and you want to get as much input as you can, but you want to make sense of it as quickly as possible, so you don't have 1,000 things to do, you only have 3 things to do. And the piece of software I use for that is something called Visual Concept. It's not widely available at the moment. It's being redeveloped by the firm that initially developed it. But it's software that supports that facilitation technique of acquiring those ideas from people, writing them down. You know, lots of people will do the same thing with Post-it notes, you know, writing those ideas on Post-it notes, sticking on a piece of brown paper, and then moving them around and grouping them. So you can say, well, these ideas belong to the same thing. So just as a mind map works from, you know, one idea to many branches, Visual Concept works in the opposite direction. So, and I found that nearly every problem I deal with
one or the other
is one or the other. Yeah.
What's the mind mapping software you use?
I've used Mind Manager a lot in the past.
Yeah.
But I also use XMind and FreeMind, which are both free versions of that software.
XMind or FreeMind. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And the final question, you've maybe in part already answered it. You know, what is the book that you most recommend to aspiring leaders? And I think earlier on you mentioned Black Box Thinking. What was the name of the author? Was it Matthew Syed?
He writes a column in the Times, and he used to be a world-class table tennis player. So he writes a lot in the sports section, but he's also a leader writer, and it's a really good book. And it's well worth reading. It's about our inability to deal with the truth. You know, when when the truth is staring us in the face, it's, you know, that human impulse to run away from it, to deny it, to suppress it. It's a really good book. It's not the book I had as the answer to
go on then.
To your question, because I think, you know, I don't have any one individual book I'd recommend on leadership, but it's always seemed to me that the person who wrote most persuasively on leadership that I have read over the past 30 years was Peter Drucker. And I still think, you know, he passed away 15, 20 years ago now. But his writing is still relevant. It's still on the money. And, you know, I have a number of his books around the house, and once in a while, you know, if I'm stuck on some particular problem, I'll often pick up one of his books and see if there's anything in there that will help. And you know, he was so, his range of expertise on management and leadership was so extensive, and it's so different to most of the advice you see on management. It is to the point. It's pithy. It's he doesn't waste any time. He's not pulling any punches. And it's all rooted in his experience of working with the biggest companies on earth. So for me, he still remains, you know, in a world where there's probably far too much literature on management and leadership. You know, he's the one that I would recommend.
And of his, any particular books that stand out?
No, I meant to research the answer to that question before you asked me, and I meant to go and look in the bookcase to see if I could think of one, but no, just look at his bibliography, and there'll be one there for everybody.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Richard, really, really appreciate all that you've shared today. Obviously, as always, we'll put some notes up against the blog, just highlighting some of the points you've made and some of the tidbits that you've shared. We'll look forward to the next episode. We have 2 interludes coming up. So the interlude episodes are where it's me just sharing sort of experience or advice. Actually, the next one's me speaking to a coach, talking about 5 key sort of points to think about when you're starting in your new role. And then after that, I will be sharing the portfolio of activity that I always recommend for job seekers. So they'll be coming up in the next week or two. But for today, thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.